$70,000. You know, they have an apartment for me. I get traded from Miami to Phoenix, and I'm the type of guy I have no patience. So when I get to Phoenix...
Shaquille O'Neal is facing a wave of controversies that are hard to ignore. For decades, Shaquille built a legacy that seemed untouchable, from dominating the NBA to expanding into business and media with inside the NBA. But in recent years, a string of controversies, financial setbacks, and personal struggles, from the fallout of the FTX collapse to legal battles and growing public scrutiny, have started raising serious questions. So what's really been happening behind the scenes? And how did things begin to shift for someone who once looked completely unstoppable? Join us as we uncover what's actually been happening to Shaquille O'Neal. The FTX disaster. In 2021, Shaquille O'Neal became one of the most visible celebrity endorsers of FTX, the cryptocurrency exchange founded by Sam Bankman-Fried.
With Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX, and George, we know that you traveled down to...
That was, at the time, one of the most aggressively marketed financial platforms in the world. He was not alone. Tom Brady, Gisele Bündchen, Stephen Curry, Kevin O'Leary, and dozens of other high-profile athletes and entertainers were paid significant sums to promote FTX to their audiences. Shaq's deal made him a highly visible face of a platform that was running television commercials during major sporting events and positioning itself as the future of finance for ordinary investors who wanted access to what they were being told was the next generation of wealth-building technology. In November 2022, FTX filed for bankruptcy. The collapse wiped out approximately $8 billion in customer funds and triggered one of the most significant financial fraud prosecutions in American history. Sam Bankman-Fried was eventually convicted on 7 counts of fraud and conspiracy and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The customers who had trusted the platform with their savings lost everything, and the celebrities who had promoted it to those customers suddenly found themselves at the center of a legal question that had never been fully tested before. If a famous person endorses a financial product that turns out to be fraudulent, what is their legal responsibility to the people who lost money based partly on their recommendation? A class action lawsuit was filed against the FTX celebrity endorsers, including Shaquille O'Neal, alleging that they had promoted unregistered securities to the public. The lawsuit argued that the celebrities had used their platforms and their credibility to direct ordinary investors toward a product that was essentially a fraud, and that the investors who lost money deserved compensation from the people who had helped build the trust that made those investments possible. The legal process produced its own secondary story. Court papers were served to several celebrity defendants in the case, and Shaquille O'Neal became a specific focal point because of what his lawyers reported. He had eluded service for months. His attorney told the court that Shaq had actively avoided being served with the legal documents, which added a layer of unflattering public attention to an already difficult situation. In June 2025, Shaquille O'Neal settled the FTX-related lawsuit, agreeing to pay $1.8 million. He was not the only celebrity to settle, and the $1.8 million figure represents a fraction of what he earns in a given year across his various business interests. But the settlement is a matter of public record, and the implications of it are worth sitting with for a moment. A man who promoted a financial platform to his audience, who used the trust that decades of public goodwill had generated to direct people toward an investment opportunity, agreed to pay $1.8 million in settlement of claims that those people were harmed by the promotion. He did not admit wrongdoing as part of the settlement, which is standard legal practice. The FTX episode is the most financially consequential of the recent chapters in his public story, but it is also the one with the broadest context. Nearly every major celebrity who endorsed FTX ended up in the same lawsuit. The specific harm they caused, individually and collectively, is genuinely difficult to quantify, and the legal system's approach to celebrity financial endorsements remains an evolving area of law that the FTX collapse pushed into much sharper focus. The FTX settlement was financially painful and publicly embarrassing, but it was also something he could resolve by writing a check. The next chapter of his recent story involves something that cannot be resolved by writing a check, because it concerns the end of something that 3 generations of basketball fans grew up with, and the way it ended left a genuinely bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths. Let's talk about that. Inside the NBA is Dead on TNT. Inside the NBA on TNT ran for 35 years. It is, by any reasonable critical standard, the finest studio sports program in the history of American television. The combination of Ernie Johnson, Charles Barkley, Kenny Smith, and Shaquille O'Neal produced something that transcended sports analysis and became genuine entertainment for people who had no particular interest in basketball. The chemistry between the four of them was specific and irreplaceable. Barkley's unfiltered opinions, Shaq's physical presence and genuine hilarity, Kenny as the rational counterweight, and Ernie as the anchor who kept the whole enterprise from flying apart under its own centrifugal force. 35 years of that produced moments that are still watched on YouTube by people who were not alive when some of them aired. In 2024, Warner Bros. Discovery lost the rights to broadcast NBA games to Amazon and NBC in a deal that changed the television landscape for professional basketball. Warner Bros. Discovery had the contractual right to match any offer, and they declined to exercise it. The NBA moved to its new broadcast homes, and inside the NBA, which had been the defining pre-game, halftime, and post-game program of the TNT era, had nowhere to go. TNT was losing the games the show was built around analyzing. The show was going with them. Charles Barkley had signed a contract extension with TNT in 2022 that was widely reported to be worth $250 million over 10 years. He had turned down offers from other networks because he believed TNT would retain the NBA rights and because he had given his word and was unwilling to walk it back. When the rights deal fell through and the show's future became uncertain, Charles made a specific and public commitment. He would honor his contract and go wherever TNT went, even if that meant doing a different show without the NBA as its foundation. His loyalty to the commitment was genuine and visible, and it made the circumstances of the show's end more complicated than a simple rights deal expiration. Shaquille O'Neal's situation in the transition was different from Barkley's in a specific way. When Warner Bros. Discovery announced it was forming a new streaming sports platform called Discovery Sports, Shaq was announced as one of the co-hosts who would continue in that context. The show, as it had existed for 35 years, with the four of them around that desk, was over, but Shaq had a path forward with the network. Charles' path was murkier, and the public farewell to the show, when the final TNT broadcast eventually aired, carried an emotional weight that reflected how much both the audience and the participants understood they were watching something genuinely irreplaceable come to an end. The relationships, the history, the accumulated store of shared experience that gave the jokes their depth and the debates their stakes, all of that was built inside a specific context that no longer exists. Shaq is continuing to work in sports media, but the era that made him the most entertaining basketball analyst on television ended not with a bang, but with a rights deal negotiation, and the version of him that existed inside the NBA will not exist again in quite the same way. Meanwhile, his personal life has been producing its own headlines, and the story of his marriage to Shaquille O'Neal and everything that came out after it ended is considerably more complicated than the public was led to believe while it was happening. The Shaquille divorce and the weight of a public marriage dissected in private. Shaquille O'Neal and Shawnee Nelson, who took his name as Shaquille O'Neal, were married in December 2002. They had 4 children together: Sharif, Amira, Shakir, and Mayara, in addition to his son Tahira from a relationship before the marriage. On the surface, the marriage was an extension of the Shaq brand: big, warm, entertaining, slightly chaotic in a way that the public found endearing. When the divorce was first filed in 2009, the news generated enormous attention and then quieted down when the couple reconciled. The marriage continued until 2021, when Shawnee filed again and the divorce was finalized in 2022. What Shawnee said publicly about the marriage after it ended was significant and specific in ways that her public statements during the marriage had not been. She said on her own television program, Shawnee's Home Court, that she had not been in love with Shaq for a very long time before the divorce was finalized.
They were supposed to meet at my daughter's birthday, but Keon couldn't come. He said, I practiced 3 times.
She said the relationship had been structured around his needs and his career and his public identity, in ways that left her own identity and needs perpetually secondary. She described building a life around someone else's life and eventually understanding that the structure was not sustainable and was not honest. Shaq responded publicly to Shawnee's statements with a combination of regret and acknowledgement. He said he could have been a better husband. He said the person he is now is different from the person he was during the marriage. He did not dispute the substance of what she described. The specific dynamic she outlined of a marriage structured around a man whose fame and ego and professional demands consumed the available space is one that has been described by partners of famous men across every industry and every era. Shaq's acknowledgement of it was more direct than most public figures in similar situations offer, which is worth noting even as the underlying facts of what she described remain uncomfortable. The children of that marriage have continued to be public figures in their own right, with varying degrees of success and visibility. Shaquille O'Neal played professionally in the Big Three League and with the Sacramento Kings on an exhibit contract before his career stalled at the level just below full NBA participation. Miara O'Neal played basketball at the University of Florida and entered the transfer portal in April 2025, seeking a new program. Shaquille O'Neal plays at Sacramento State, which is where his father has agreed to serve as voluntary general manager in 2025, working alongside former NBA guard Mike Bibby, who was named head coach of the program. The specific geography of Shaqille's situation, his father voluntarily taking a role at the school where his son plays, is either a touching example of paternal support or a potential conflict of interest, depending entirely on your perspective. And the basketball world has been vocal about both interpretations. The divorce has been processed publicly, and the family has restructured itself in ways that are visible to anyone following his social media or his children's careers. The personal chapter that has generated the most recent and most uncomfortable headlines, however, involves his conduct toward women who are not family members, and the accounts are specific enough and consistent enough that they deserve to be addressed directly. The Sophie Raines situation. In late 2024 and into 2025, social media generated significant discussion around footage of Shaquille O'Neal at Sophie Raines' 21st birthday party. Sophie is a content creator on OnlyFans with a large online following, and footage from the event showed Shaq interacting with her in ways that a significant portion of the viewing public described as inappropriate for a 52-year-old man at a 21-year-old woman's birthday celebration. The footage spread widely. The comments under every post sharing it were largely unflattering. He was described as a creepy uncle by at least one attendee who went on record about the event, and the phrase spread quickly enough to generate its own news cycle. Shaq addressed the Sophie Raines situation directly, telling TMZ that he does not like to date young women and that he prefers older women, specifically mothers. That specific framing of his denial, that he does not date young women but finds older mothers attractive, did not resolve the conversation about the footage. The question the footage raised was not whether he was dating Sophie Raines. It was whether his conduct toward a much younger woman at a social event was appropriate, and his denial addressed a different question than the one most people were asking. The distinction is not a subtle one, and the way it was handled reinforced rather than resolved the discomfort. This was not an isolated incident in terms of public perception of his conduct toward women. Earlier headlines had involved a woman whose car broke down on a Florida interstate who received help from Shaq, which was presented as a heartwarming story and received as one. But the accumulation of incidents involving his interactions with women in public and semi-public settings has created a pattern of commentary that his public relations responses have not managed to effectively address. The creepy uncle characterization, which began with one woman at one event, has now been used by multiple commentators across multiple incidents, which suggests it is landing with an audience that finds it accurate rather than unfair. There is an additional dimension to this that involves the specific dynamics of fame and physical scale. Shaquille O'Neal is 7 feet 1 inch tall and weighs in the region of 325 pounds. At an event, his physical presence is not the same as the physical presence of any other person in the room. When someone his size directs attention at a much younger, much smaller person, the power dynamic involved is not equivalent to what the same attention would look like between two people of comparable scale and standing. That dynamic has been part of the conversation about his recent conduct, and it is a legitimate part of the conversation, even if it is rarely stated explicitly. The conduct questions have not been resolved and are unlikely to disappear from the public discourse around him. At the same time, the professional chapters of his story in 2024 and 2025 have included developments that reflect a genuinely more complex and in some ways more interesting picture of who he is at 52 than the controversies alone would suggest. Let's explore that. What he is actually building right now. In April 2025, ESPN's Shams Charania reported that Shaquille O'Neal had agreed to become the voluntary general manager of the Sacramento State Hornets men's basketball program. The role is unpaid, which matters as a signal of motivation. He is not doing this for a salary. His son Shakir plays for Sacramento State, which provides an obvious personal motivation. But the nature of the arrangement goes beyond simple parental involvement. He is taking on a genuine operational role at a collegiate program that finished last in the Big Sky Conference in 2024 to 2025, with a record of 7 wins and 25 losses, working alongside head coach Mike Bibby, who is himself a former NBA player with a complicated public legacy of his own. The combination of a Hall of Fame general manager and a former NBA starting point guard coaching a program that just finished 7-25 is either a recipe for rapid transformation or a high-profile experiment that generates significant attention, regardless of outcomes. He has also been involved in the launch of the Dunkman League.
We need a Dunkman League, since the NBA guys don't have enough pride to give us, scoring system, so.
A professional dunking competition format that he co-developed and that is being positioned as a standalone entertainment product. Mac McClung, who won the NBA Slam Dunk Contest at the 2023 and 2024 All-Star Weekends, has been announced as the face of the league alongside Shaq's involvement. The concept treats elite dunking as its own competitive discipline, rather than as a subsidiary event within a broader all-star format, which is a genuine creative leap that reflects Shaq's long-standing interest in finding ways to package athletic entertainment for audiences that the traditional sports structure does not fully serve. Whether the Dunkman League achieves sustainable commercial viability is an open question, but the ambition behind it reflects the same entrepreneurial instinct that has driven every significant business move he has made since retiring from playing. He launched the Shaqalicious XL Gummies line in September 2024 in partnership with the Hershey Company, adding an oversized candy product to a brand portfolio that already includes restaurant chains, fitness products, technology partnerships, and entertainment ventures. He was named president of basketball at Reebok in October 2023, a role that reflects the brand's attempt to re-enter the professional performance basketball market after years of ceding that ground to Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour. He appeared in the Fortnite collaboration that produced Shaq skins, including his DJ Diesel persona and a Lego minifigure version of himself. He participated in the FIFA World Cup draw on December 5, 2025. He starred in Power Moves, released on Netflix in June 2025. He continues to do stand-up comedy and DJ events under the DJ Diesel name across multiple countries. The business portfolio he has constructed across 30 years is genuinely extraordinary in scope. He has ownership stakes in over 150 companies across retail, food, technology, and entertainment. He owns 17 Auntie Anne's Pretzels franchises. He has owned Papa John's franchises. He has invested in Google, Ring, and Apple before their most significant periods of growth. His net worth is estimated at approximately $400 million, built through a combination of playing contracts, endorsement deals, and private investments that reflect a business intelligence that the entertainment of his public persona often obscures. The man who spent 25 years being paid to be funny on television built one of the most diversified business empires in the history of professional sports. The Inside the NBA chapter of that story is worth examining specifically because it was both a genuine cultural contribution and a commercial asset that is now restructured rather than ended. Discovery Sports has announced Shaq's continued involvement as a host on their upcoming platform, which means the television career is not over. What is over is the specific configuration that made the television career so beloved, and no amount of new platforms or new formats changes the fact that Ernie, Charles, Kenny, and Shaq around that specific desk produced something that the industry had never seen before and will not produce again in the same form. The full picture of what has happened to Shaquille O'Neal across the past several years cannot be honestly told without returning to the thing that connects all of it: the gap between the public image and the private reality, and what that gap has cost him. The real tragedy underneath all of it. Shaquille O'Neal has built one of the most carefully constructed public personas in the history of American celebrity. The man who is simultaneously the most physically dominant basketball player of his era and the funniest person in every room he enters. The persona is specific, and it is powerful, and it is genuine in its core elements. He genuinely is funny, have warmth toward the people around him. He genuinely does give money and time to causes that do not generate headlines and do not benefit him publicly. The Shaka Claus event he runs annually, where he buys toys and gifts for children who would not otherwise receive them, is the activity he has described as the one he cares most about. The spontaneous moments where he stops to help a stranded motorist or pays for a stranger's groceries reflect an authentic generosity that exists regardless of whether anyone is watching. But the persona has also been a shield. What the recent years have revealed is that the shield has gaps. None of these things make him a villain, but together they form a picture of a man who spent 30 years constructing an image of invulnerability, and who is now, in his early 50s, navigating the discovery that the image was never the complete truth. He is, at 52, a considerably more complicated person than the entertainment of his public persona has historically allowed people to see. The recent years have not destroyed his legacy. They've added texture to it that is harder to look at directly than the championship rings and the highlight reels and the inside the NBA bloopers. But harder to look at directly is not the same thing as not worth looking at. It just requires being willing to see more than you expected to. Which of these chapters do you think has done the most lasting damage to his legacy? And do you think the Shaquille O'Neal we see now is a more honest version of who he has always been? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.